Hello again, and thank you for staying with us. As the conflict in Sudan enters its 20th day, there seems to be no will to end the hostility that has prompted mass international evacuations and created a dire humanitarian situation. Hundreds of people have died and thousands more have fled in almost 3 weeks of fighting between members of the army and a paramilitary group. International relations expert Dr. Charles Sinkala joins us for more. Dr. Sinkala, now the United Nations says Sudan's descent into this violence is now at a dangerous tipping point, calling for security guarantees for the warring sides to allow humanitarian aid into this country. Is this likely to happen after previous calls seem to have fallen on deaf ears?
Yes, good evening. Thank you so much for having me. And Chancellor, the United Nations are quite correct to say that the escalation of violence within Sudan has escalated to a boiling point. I'm sure we can see from many media places of what is happening, and about more than 100,000 people has been displaced and or considered to be refugees in the neighboring countries. It is quite unfortunate that regional bodies and the United Nations and other parties failed to come to an understanding before these things can reach at this point in time.
Now, in just 2 weeks, the conflict has already created more than 100,000 refugees who have fled to neighboring Chad. Now, the United Nations warns that the fighting could force hundreds of thousands more to flee their homes. Now, one wonders if this will result in a regional crisis of some sort there.
Yes, I did. It is already a regional crisis. You know, that 100,000 people has been displaced. For instance, if they go to the neighboring countries there, they will actually affect those other nations. And I mean, they will be affected as well from getting anywhere freely within the country. It is a major crisis that needs an urgent intervention in terms of bringing the two parties to abide to the truce that has been concluded.
I want to take part of what the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said. He says that the world body is working very closely with the African Union and other international government authorities on development to end the conflict in Sudan. But all the previous truces agreed upon since the fighting began seem to have deteriorated almost immediately. Perhaps just shed some light as to why this has been the case.
Well, still, when one would think about these civil wars or wonders, especially from the perspective of South Africa, where we have enjoyed that peace in terms of security, this emanates from the background of lawlessness, and disobedience by citizens, and as well as lack of capacity by government managing the security affairs of the country. It is very difficult for them to condone what is happening there, in the fact that the rebel paramilitary leader who is being funded by Khalifa Haftar from Libya, they've been allowed to bring freely arms into Sudan. And that already it is a compromise. That person cannot be recognized as a legit participant in terms of democracy in that country. We have to declare them not to use it any other means, but that's a criminal matter that has to be subjected of not recognizing the other paramilitary party in terms of negotiations and capacitate the government in dealing with these issues.
As we wrap up our conversation, would you say there is any hope that diplomacy will ultimately bring the conflict to an end, or are we likely to see yet another failed African state which is ruled through the barrel of the gun here?
Look, at this moment, diplomacy is something which is out. You can't have diplomatic relations in terms of dealing with criminal matters such as what is happening in Sudan there. They have to, like what you said, we have to maybe beef up the support in terms of escalating another military wing to capacitate the government military machinery to counter fight these illegitimate rebels who was raided and caused so much harm and pain within the Sudan. Look, for every war, there is every aspect of negotiating and thinking that one day the war will end. But as far as the fueling of the war and the external factors who are fighting on behalf of others, like what we've known that this approach was being fought for on behalf of United States and Russia, who are fighting within that region for the dominance of depositing a leader who will be subservient to them.
What do you make of the response, especially coming from states beyond Sudan or further afield as well? Because it seems that many countries are more preoccupied with getting their citizens out of Sudan as opposed to really finding an end to this particular problem in that country or this conflict in that country.
Yeah, indeed, for them to resort to evacuation, which means that the efforts of discussing the criminal becomes unattainable and undesirable, That's why they're resorting to flee, because what is happening there, you cannot even put the two parties on the table to discuss the matters. It is absolutely has become very difficult. They've been funded. What I mean is the other party who is illegitimate fighting the government's army, they are very well funded by external forces. Actually, even though they've got 70,000 troops, they outpower the 210,000, 220,000 troops from the government in terms of training and being sophisticated. Look, if we look at the case study of Rwanda, Rwanda went through a very bad civil war, where the Hutus and the Tutsis, they fought, and killed over 1 million people. And the way they have come out from that, is by ignoring the external factors. And, President Paul Kagame has reunited the whole people there. I think this can be the mirror of what should be done in Sudan, of firstly closing an ear from the United Nations, closing an ear from the AU, closing an ear from would-be so-called Mother Teresa's and those who would like to assist, and deal with these issues internally as the people of Sudan. I think maybe there shall be some light of hope under the tunnel.
And just to add to another comment made by the UN Secretary General, that's Antonio Guterres, he's also called for the warring factions within Sudan to put the people first as opposed to continuing with this particular conflict. Do you think that that message will resonate with people within that particular region?
You and me, Chancellor, we've realized that a war of words, does not relate to a physical fight or war. United Nations and its Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has always been like a spokesperson to condemn a human rights abuse to some extent that, some countries have been threatened to be suspended from certain organizations. But those are merely talks which have got no physical involvement. What they need is to escalate the military to go and dispose of those people who are fighting. I think physically to bring hope to that nation rather than merely sending a statement.
Dr. Charles Sinkala, he's an international relations expert there, speaking to us about the situation and the conflict out in Sudan.